welcome. We are truly thrilled to host New York Times bestselling and Edgar Award-winning and National Book Award shortlisted author Kate Milford as we celebrate her fantastic new standalone mystery, Rialto. Kate is the beloved author of Green Glass House, The Thief Knot, The Raconteur's Commonplace Book, and so many other folklore-infused adventures. And as for us at Kinokuniya, we feel this is a bit of a homecoming. We've had Kate here for a number of books, The Left-Handed Fate, and we had a commemorative of all of her works, but we concentrated on The Raconteur's Commonplace Book, and each visit has been enlightening and a real joy. We're delighted to welcome you back. Kate, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. It's really lovely to be back here.
Okay, well, let me just say on this book, the setting, the lore, and the etymology is fantastic. And let's dive right into the incredibly atmospheric backdrop of the story. The setting itself feels like a living character. Did you do a lot of research into abandoned amusement parks for this book, and are they a major part of folklore in general?
Yeah, I did. Well, so I've been a fan of theme parks and amusement parks of all kinds, but theme parks in particular since I was little. And one of my childhood memories that really stuck, and I sort of didn't put together how formative this was for this book, which is a weird thing. Like sometimes you write a book and someone will ask you a question, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that was like such a big part of it. Like when I was writing Green Glass House, I had 2 family members in Baltimore that had big old houses just like this, and like I didn't realize how much I was drawing on. I was like, it seems obvious in retrospect, till my dad pointed it out. And so this one, when I was a kid growing up in Maryland, there was a theme park there, one of these like very handmade parks that still are all around the country, but you kind of have to find them because they don't tend to have like roller coasters. They don't tend to have like thrill rides. There was one called the Enchanted Forest right outside of Catonsville near Baltimore in Maryland. And it was like extremely handmade, like back in the 40s. And by the time I was growing up in like the 80s, it was starting to fall apart a little bit, but it was the kind of place where like they had an Alice in Wonderland teacup ride, but it wasn't like the swirling teacups. It was like a train of fiberglass handmade, someone built them teacups that would like go along like bumpy train tracks, take you underground, and then you get out and there'd be like fiberglass model of Alice falling down, and you could smell the bromine, which is that chemical that theme parks use to like treat their water. And so every time I smell bromine in any park anywhere, I'm like instantly back in the Alice in Wonderland teacup ride. But the Enchanted Forest closed down in, I want to say the 90s or the early 2000s. And for a long time, it sat off the road in the woods off like Route 40 outside of Baltimore. And you could still see the gate for many years, and then you kind of couldn't see the gate, but then maybe you could kind of see like the road sign with like the king, like the round Humpty Dumpty looking king. So it slowly faded away and became more and more abandoned over my lifetime. And you can, this is such a long story, but like this is, I think, where this book came from. And you can still find some of the rides, and not rides, but like the visual attraction things in this petting zoo in Maryland. So that's kind of been in the background of my head forever, like this idea of these places that people make. And oftentimes in the old days, and even now with Imagineering, it's still in many ways like someone's vision that they are hand making, they are figuring out, they are building from scratch. So I love that. It is someone taking a story and making it physical. And in many ways, that's like what I try to do when I'm writing a book. I want to build a place that feels real enough that when you step into it, you can believe that there's not just the story you're experiencing or like the one ride that you're on or the one thing. You can believe that there is a broader world and more things going on there. You open a door, even if it's marked like stack only, like you can kind of imagine that maybe the story continues off screen. So there's that. I did a lot of research into Imagineering and like Joe Rohde, who is an Imagineer who's worked for Disney for many years. He doesn't anymore, but he was instrumental in building things like the Pandora section at Animal Kingdom and lots of other stuff too. But there's very good talks of his online talking about building that and building like the different cities, country areas in Animal Kingdom. So thinking about the thought and the storytelling that a place can bring. And he calls it narrative placemaking, which I think is like, was like, give me the word for the thing I like to do. So there was a lot of that. And then also we visited existing theme parks all over the place. And, you know, I'm a Disney World fan going way back, but also like Knoebels Grove, which is another one of those, like started out as a very handmade park in Pennsylvania and now has some great roller coasters, some of the best wooden roller coasters. And then Ghibli Park in Japan, which is, I could talk for hours. Like I wrote myself an essay because it's in like the Millennium Park with like different parts of the theme park are like hidden around the park. So you can just be wandering around and then somehow this amazing piece of storytelling just comes out of the woods. And it's all perfectly made, and you can walk into May and Satsuki's house and you can open any drawer and you can take the things out, and they're era appropriate. I saw a pair of aunties who were probably 70 like open a drawer and go, oh, we had this, like, and then there are people to make sure that if you don't find the stupid bucket to look through, you like, they're like, try the bucket. If you're like, oh, what a stupid bucket. It's great. So anyhow, there are things like that that as I was writing it, all came together for like the town and the park. And yes, that's the very long answer to your question.
That's great answer. While we're on the subject, I'd like to ask about the name itself. The amusement park is called Rialto, and it features a Rialto-inspired bridge. Is there more behind that choice than meets the eye? Was there a symbolic, historical, or thematic reason that made Rialto the right name for the place, and ultimately the right name for the book?
That's a really good question too, and part of it goes back to an early draft of this book before I even thought of having it connected to the roaming world. I had an idea for, I've always loved Venice, and I went when I was in high school, and I think I have the kind of, maybe, I don't know, it felt magical to me then, and on the other hand, as an adult, I know it's a real place and real people live there, so there's the romantic view of it, but there's also, when I started writing this, I was thinking of the sinking of a whole city, and how, thinking of the sinking of Venice, but also thinking of like in places in the US where there are towns built on floodplains, or places built where they were built before people fully understood what the actual biome was there, like thinking of the Dust Bowl, but also like a river that maybe doesn't flood for 50 years, and so towns built there, and all of a sudden, like the thing that was obviously always going to happen, happens. And so I was thinking about things like that, and I was thinking about a town built on a floodplain that had named itself Rialto and had this sort of connection of like being a city that sinks and rises, but of course like sort of magical. And then I tossed that draft out, but I never changed the file name. And then I started thinking about this amusement park. And at that point, I had started thinking of linking it to this world. And I was thinking, what are some places that would have the same feel as a place like Nagspeak, would have that sort of instant sense of, this is a real place and real people live here, which is again what I hope Nagspeak feels like. But also it has such a sense of a magical feeling, or a feeling where you feel like if you walk around the corner at the right time or open the right door, you might find something magical. And that's how Venice always felt to me. So I had the idea that this theme park would be themed to that. So that's one thing that sort of started that way. And then as I was writing it, then I threw that draft out. But the justification for it in the roaming world, because this book is also a lot about sharing stories, which also like a good theme park is, because you've got the storytelling, whatever, is that Rialto, the Rialto Bridge, the Rialto Market, it's a marketplace, it's an exchange. And so the bridge is named after the marketplace. And as an exchange, like you can exchange goods, you can exchange services, you can also obviously exchange stories. And so I started thinking of this park as a place that was still a Rialto, like still a market, but a place for sharing stories. And that felt good to me even as I started diving into this version. And there is a character, one of the people whose ancestors built the park, who was like super Italian. She's from Verano. She is a lace maker, which plays a big part in this. So it did turn out weirdly to be, and I think this happens sometimes, like where something follows you through drafts and all of a sudden something that was totally relevant in a totally different way turns out to still be relevant, which was good because I like that title. But yeah, so it did turn out to still have its connections, and it was just about finding the right ones for this draft.
Okay. So, and continuing out of the subject of names, the family names in this book feel deliberate and suggestive. For instance, Vicar brings to mind an ordained cleric, and Forwander sounds very much like the derivative or a cousin to Roamer. I think I asked you this similar question when you were here for Raconteur's Commonplace book, but can you refresh my memory on how you choose your names, from certain characters? But particularly Rialto, did you select these specific names with an ulterior meaning in mind? Does word etymology also play a role character in your identification of these characters?
It does. Vicar, it's funny. That one, so I have a notebook of names that I just think sound nice, and Vicar has been in there as a possible last name for a long time. And originally, yeah, that one was sort of just like, oh, I have this last name that I thought was nice for like several years that's in this notebook. And so that's where that came from. Ivy and Dahlia, this is one of those weird synergy things because Ivy and Dahlia, I also just really like those names. Those are two things I like. I think they make pretty names. I was not going to name my children those things, and if it's a great name that I don't think I'm going to give to my children, like some character's going to get it. Do I have a Clementine already? That's one I've wanted to use. I have Clem Candler, but she's Clemens. Yes, there's still going to be a Clementine at some point. But what's funny then is, I'll come back to Ivy and Dahlia because there was an unintended cool thing that happened there. But yeah, the Four Wanders, that was definitely like, but something that I was hoping would not be too obvious. Like there's a kind of joyful wordplay thing that you can do in a book if you want the name to really give a clue or give away the game a little bit. And some people like to be really playful with that. I like to try and be a little more subtle, but it's usually there. So yeah, Forewander, definitely a wanderer. Fia Boriana, her last name. Boriana is another name for a Baronella, someone from Verano, which is also the name of her shop, Baronella. Monty Kirkyard, a kirkyard is a graveyard. And again, but like things I'm hoping won't be too like slap you in the face with it to the point where it's, because I also want this to feel believable, like these are people and not caricatures. So sometimes that's sort of a hard line to thread because I want you to believe, again, that he's a real person, but also I like that being there. And yes, I absolutely love etymology. I'm on Wiktionary constantly, like tracing word names backwards. I have sets of dictionaries that, my Venetian dictionary is in storage, and I actually have to get it out for another book that it's going to become relevant for. And maybe is this a good place to tell the funny story that I started to tell to you about? So John was asking, how do we pronounce this critter here, which is a giraffe with the wrong kind of antlers, because giraffes generally have horns, not antlers. So this critter is called the hauntled camelopard, because haunteliers is an old English word for antlers. So hauntled, antlered. And a camelopard is an early word for a giraffe because in very earliest like writings of it by Europeans who encountered it for the first time in their travels to Africa were like, this thing looks like a camel and it looks like a leopard. So they called it a camelopard. So I really like finding those old words. So, and this guy is the winged ounce, because an ounce is an old word for a snow leopard. But so we were talking about how do we pronounce hauntled camelopard, and half the time the answer is I don't know. This is how I say it, but I don't know if it's right. And sometimes, which was a thing that happened a lot with Raconteur's Commonplace book, where I really had fun with like deriving words because there's a whole chapter on weird fires that all needed weird names. Sometimes I don't know how to pronounce them myself out loud until I get on the phone after publication with my producer at Recorded Books, whose name I should have looked up. He is amazing. I've worked with him, I think, ever since The Thief Knot. And he speaks like 4 languages, and like we go into like deep dives on the etymology of things and like, is this a Proto-Germanic derived word, or is this like more recently like Old English, or is this like Middle English derived? I didn't know how to pronounce like, oh, even in Ghosts of Greenglass House, the no. There's a character with a Korean name in this one. And I was like, I can't tell you how to pronounce that. I do not speak any Korean at all. And he said, no worries, I do. So like, it's like, but we literally spend like an hour or so on the phone going through and figuring out all these, how to pronounce all these things. I just know how to write them down.
All right, well, and it ties beautifully into the deeper lore of your world, also the names. The Roamers are a prominent theme in Rialto, and as they happen across many of your works, stretching all the way back to Julian Roamer. What exactly are the Roamers? And if I'm allowed to ask, and what specific significance does Julian have to the story of Rialto? Also, did I read it right that some of the key characters are actually descendants of Julian? Oh, some way or other? Either through spirit or purpose or actual DNA?
Okay.
Water Wonders, are they like descendants?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. I thought I read it somewhere.
I don't know. They could be. I don't know.
Okay.
I've not thought about that or been asked that, so I'm going to give the answer for anything where I have not thought. Maybe, and that's not a coded thing. That's just now it's in my head, and so now you might have made it real. So maybe we'll find out later. But currently, I don't know the answer to that. Schrodinger's Julian descendants. The roamers. So the roaming world is this thing that sort of exists within our world, or our world in the books. And the roamers are a group of characters that, through one means or other, and they sort of get into it in Rialto, like some are truly magical. Some have what is called furly, which is kind of like a magical something. Some bit of either ability to see it, ability to do some kind of influencing of things. In Raconteur's Commonplace book, there is a second thing that you can have as part of the roaming world, which is a warden, which is like a destiny related to something magical. We don't get into warden in this, but we get into lots of furly, which is kind of like this elusive magic that exists within our world, and you can kind of tap into it and spot it. Some people carry it, some people find it. So you can become a roamer by having or gaining furly. You can also become one just by being someone who like explores and has an open mind to these things and encounters them, and then therefore becomes aware of the roaming world, and then begins to be able to find its traces and its existence within ours. And so there's a discussion in this of like there are characters who are definitely roamers, many of them in this book. Some of them because they are magical in their way. Some of them simply because they have been traveling and, you know, paying attention and can interact with it. And so the roaming world can be anywhere. There are definitely places like Rialto, Missouri, and the city of Nagspeak, and Arcane, Missouri, and I would argue New York City. They're definitely like thick with it. And I think in some ways it's places that have like these really long, interesting histories and have, you know, had people from all over the place coming and visiting and bringing their stories. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with sharing folklore and the extent to which in this world some folklore is real. And so by sharing that, you're sort of passing on the furly and passing on the roaming world. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, like you're starting to answer my questions ahead of time. So maybe I'll throw this in because you already talked about the furly sensitive roamers and then the people who you call quotidian. Within your universe, there's a really fascinating dynamic between different groups of people and how they experience the extraordinary. Some characters are viewed as completely quotidian, very everyday mainstream folks, while others are roamers or individuals sensitive to the furly. How did you approach balancing these two distinct groups of characters, and what makes someone an insider to the Rialto secrets versus someone who is blind to them, and how is that division handled mechanically and socially within the story?
That's a really good question, because that definitely does come up, and there's two views on it, I think. two, maybe three that are in the book, because there are some characters that definitely sort of have a gatekeeping mentality where it's like, we know what's going on here, and we know that we're not supposed to just tell everybody, like, and except the rest of them are like, do we know that? Like, we built a theme park with these stories, and that was the whole idea. It was like to share these stories, but in a theme park setting where they could safely assume that most people that experienced it would just be like, hey, this is a cool story attached to this roller coaster. But really, if you were open to the Furley, you would know that there might be doors you could open in the park that would open into something unexpected, or elements of, these rides that are based on things that in the roaming world are very, very real. So you will find out a character who came to the park at one point just to visit the park and figured it out, figured out what was going on. And then there's a character who's very much like, that's exactly what we want to avoid. And there's another character who's like, what is it? And then there's two sets of police in the town, which that was one of my favorite scenes to write. So you have the courts of pie powders, which is an actual thing, goes back to old Europe, where you would have fairs and festivals that would be set up for a brief period of time, and you had to have a special organization to address anything bad that happened during a time of fair and festival, because you could safely assume that maybe neither the wronged party or neither the plaintiff or the defendant might be there for more than a couple days. You might have something involving a traveler through, you might have something involving a traveling vendor. So there had to be an organization that could address them and that was the Court of Pie Powders, which comes from pied poudre, like dusty feet. And so there is a pie powder court in Rialto that is exactly one guy, and his name is Kit Justiciar, another name that was maybe a little too obvious. But and then there is a quotidian police force that's there to just keep the peace and keep stuff, and they get along just fine, but they kind of jab at each other. And at one point, when they come to the house where the main characters are staying to address something that's happened, all three of them turn up, and Justiciar is like, this is going to be my jurisdiction. And then the other two are like, I guess we'll just leave. And he's like, well, what you have to investigate. And they're like, well, okay, just but it's all very good natured. And at one point he calls them quotidian, and they're like, you take that back. So even the people who are not magical in this town, they're still part of it. And so, and he doesn't really mean it as a slight either. They're all buddies, but there is definitely a tension, but the town kind of exists for the blending of those things. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah, that's okay. And I'm going to jump a little bit to alongside the theme park. We've already discussed the animals, but alongside the theme park, you have this incredible local legend of an improbable forest, the Martian Woods. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
That literally swallowed the town overnight decades ago. But it's not just the trees and the ecosystems. The forest alive with these strange, marvelous animals, which we already are talked about, the Luciform carbuncle, the hauntulid camelopard, and the wing-and-outs, among others that are part, I guess they come from they're based upon the carousel. We don't have to go into detail on how they appear in the book to avoid spoilers, but what inspired the specific piece of folklore that made you bring up these animals in the carousel?
The carousel, I mean, that's another thing where you could do a crazy deep dive into history on that, because they go way back, and there are all of these different amazing, Knoebels in Pennsylvania has a carousel museum in it, and a carousel that still has brass rings you can catch, but their museum is amazing, and there's some weird animals going, anyway, but so I don't know, I've always loved carousels. And it seems like a good fit. There's certainly, here in New York, we have the Bug Carousel at the Bronx Zoo. At Turtleback Zoo, there's, they have their zoo animals there, and there are plenty of carousels that have fantastical creatures. But it feels like in our world, such a wonderful way to encounter these things that we imagine. And so that's kind of where that came from. And I was also thinking just how do I make a theme park blend it with the kind of fantasy that, feels like it belongs in an impossible forest. Interestingly, the impossible forest only showed up in the last version of this because I threw out 2 whole drafts that didn't work.
Very important.
It is. It's like, I would say it's like kind of the critical thing.
Yeah.
And, this comes back to an Ivy and Dahlia thing. So I had to fix like 5 story problems. The primary problem of the story didn't work up to about a year and a half ago. And it was like, okay, what do I do here? And I think it was thinking about Melissa Albert's book, Into the Hinterlands, that made me think of this. She has this great book called Into the Hinterlands, which is about an imaginary book and the woman who wrote it and her daughter. And then there is a second book called Tales of the Hinterland, where she actually writes the book that was in the book, which is the thing, obviously, that I love to do. I did it with Green Glass House and Raconteurs. And so then I started thinking about, and there has always been in Rialto, in the park map, there's always been this part of it that was called the Marchen Wood, because Marchen is a fairy tale. And so I was thinking of all of the forests and fairy tales, and I needed a part of it that would be something like, an enchanted forest, because an enchanted forest needs to be in there too. And so then I thought about, like, what if something happened and this forest grew up overnight, and what if it was a defensive mechanism of the park in some way? And I can't get too much into that because spoilers, but there is also a book within a book in this one that is called Tales of the Marchen Wood. And one of the stories in that is a story of, and those are the stories that like the theme park Marchen Wood is based on. And one of the stories in that is a story of like a town at the edge of the Marchen Woods decided to try and cut part of it down, and the forest swallowed that town overnight and scrambled it. So that's in the book within a book. So that gave me what I needed to bring that there. And then, so I did that, and that felt right. And then one of my readers was like, the girl's dad doesn't feel fully realized. Like, he has anxiety, and that part you've got right, but it feels like that's all we know about him. And I was like, we've got this crazy forest, let's make him a botanist. And then I realized 10 years ago I'd already named his daughters Ivy and Dahlia. It's like, this is when you know you're on the right track.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to jump a little bit to blending and craft. And this book beautifully walks the line between a classic detective story and a fantasy rich with magical features. Now, I know in Green Glass House you did something similarly brilliant by combining supernatural and realistic, but in a different way. What inspired you to bring these 2 specific genres together again here in this story? Do the strict rules of mystery help or challenge you when you're crafting a story imbued with magic?
It does help. It does help because I try to follow fair play rules. And if you're a mystery reader, and then these are rules that I think it wasn't the Detection Society or like something, but like back during the Golden Age, they put this set of rules together that were meant to keep the reader from feeling cheated. And so the idea was, if you were paying close enough attention, you should be able to mostly figure out what's going on, or at least if you got to the end and you went back, you would not feel that the rug had been pulled out from under you. You would not feel like the author had not been fair. And that doesn't mean everybody gets to figure it out beforehand, but I didn't lie to you in the story, I guess is the idea, or I didn't mislead you. It's harder to promise that people can like solve it when you're doing a fantasy too, because fantasy by necessity is unpredictable in nature and should be something that, well, in this context, I want to be something that delights and surprises and feels wondrous. So there has to be an element of the unexpected, but I also want it to feel believable, and that's where the fair play stuff comes in, because I want you to read these books and feel like it's just possible that you could visit Nags Peak or that this park exists. And for that to be true, I have to pull you up to the fantasy and build it the way I would build a mystery with clues, so that you close the book and you think, I want to go to there, not, oh, that was fun. I guess that was a cool fantasy, but I know I'm never going to visit that world. So I think like the mystery does help the fantasy, just because, again, like if you assume that you have to build in clues, the same clues or the same sensibility that makes the mystery feel fair is in some ways the same thing that makes the fantasy world feel real.
You succeeded.
Thank you. Maybe one day I'll write something that's fully like super like, not our world. This is just, let's just let it all go. But right now, there's enough weird, wondrous stuff that I'm still itching to write things
No,
to.
it works really well,
Yeah.
but I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm gonna also, some of this you've already answered, but there are three teen characters, Ivy and Alia, who are sisters, and Remy, who is the nephew of Jess, a woman who lived in the vicinity that Mark is a roller and is deeply connected to it. A lot of the momentum in the plot kicks off with Remy distributing in eccentric glyphs of bequests and unique gifts left behind by his aunt who crossed over, whatever that means. What inspired you to use the mechanics of inherited secrets and puzzles, like inheritance, to draw Ivy and Dahlia into the plot with Remy? And there are a lot of music and music boxes going on here too. So do you see music as something that's inherently magical?
I do. So the bequests was another thing that only came in with the forest, because without getting into the spoilers, although it kind of hinted at it with that story of the Marching Woods, like the forest, the legend of the forest, the legend is that the forest came overnight on a night in 1988, and it swallowed the town, it swallowed the park. The town is fine, albeit a little more eccentric because you have like apparently old growth trees like in people's backyards, but the park never reopened, and you eventually find out that the park, like nobody can even get into it anymore.
Jess?
Yes, Jess, thank you. Okay. So yes. So without getting into too many spoilers, so the bequests came in at the same time because then there was something more immediate to solve, but also it felt like a really interesting way to introduce the characters who were relevant to the event in 1988 in a really targeted, specific, I'm going to say efficient, even though this is a chonker of a book, but I was trying to like find an efficient way to get the kids to every person they needed to meet to get their necessary clues, and in a variety of people, like some of whom say thanks for the gift, and that's all I'm going to say, and some people who are like, all right, I'm not going to be that adult in a kid's mystery novel that obstructs you. Come here, I'm going to tell you what I know. So that was kind of why. And then I got to just have fun with all the weird music boxes because, and this was one of those, like, you don't have to have read any other book to appreciate it. But if you've read Raconteur's Commonplace book, you know there is a character here that collected music boxes and another character in it who is then in, Rialto. And so you can kind of know, okay, music boxes, I knew I wanted to have that tie back. But also, I've always been obsessed with these beautiful, like, mechanical music boxes with automatons in them. And there are very famous ones from France and Germany and Austria and Japan, other places that have these mechanical birds. And really goes back to, I think, like, it's an old Chinese tale of the nightingale, right? That, like, the mechanical bird. So, music boxes and automatons and things like that have always fascinated me. So I wanted to have this beautiful music box that would play a fugue and that would be a key point to it. I love music. I cannot play it. I can barely sing it. I have a very musical daughter who I think will turn out to be able to play any instrument she wants. But I also think it's like, and I say this when I go into schools too, and I'll ask kids, like, who here likes to tell stories? And the writers put their hands up. And I'm like, you're not the only ones. Like, who likes music? Like, these are small pieces of storytelling. Who likes dancing? These are small pieces of storytelling. And so music, even if you don't have words, like, you can feel the story. And I think there are things like, Peter and the Wolf that, like, visualizes it, or where you have these different, it's such a perfect encapsulation of like how like the different things can be different voices and different characters. And so that comes in much later in the book, but that was another scene I really enjoyed writing. There is a scene where several characters have to actually, Remy and his parents, have to play the fugue that the birdcage plays. And it was just one of my favorite things to write. And I do think it can be magical. And I think so many people have used musical magic and done it better than I, but I really enjoyed doing that part.
Right. And then there's the dynamic between the sisters, Ivy and Dahlia. Ivy is older, she's 14, Dahlia is 12. And they're on vacation, a summer vacation. They're quotidian.
Yes. At the beginning, at least.
At the beginning at least. Right. So here we go. So, and that's part of the question.
Yeah.
So, Dahlia has issues with anxiety.
Yes. Anxiety and depression. Yeah. And like me.
Ivy is apparently normal, more or less. But Ivy is the detective. And Ivy likes to investigate, and she's very important to the story. Remy has this issue that he has, well, I don't know, something gets taken, and then Ivy has to help figure out what's going on. But Dahlia, often because of her memory and her artistic capabilities, can add to Ivy's investigations. But there's a kind of a key point here. The sisters, as they go into the story, become more furly or become more acquainted with the magic of the town. But Dahlia seems much more adaptable. She seems to be the one who gets it first, and Ivy has a hard time.
Yeah.
Did you do that on purpose?
Kind of. And I wanted to be really clear that, like, I wanted to avoid the idea of, and this is not a knock against people who have done this, but I think there's any number of different ways about writing about mental health. And I think that there is sometimes it has at least been done before, where the mental health in some way infuses the magical capability of someone. And I did want to avoid that. Ivy and Dahlia, and I sort of had to, like, my editor actually asked me, can you make this clear at some point? We want to make sure is what she's doing some way magical. I'm like, no. She's an intuitive kid, and this is her, like, she has skills that maybe are sharpened by the things that she likes to focus on and versus the things that she can ignore, that maybe gives her a sharper focus or a clarity. But I don't think it is like her gift, because I don't feel that my own anxiety and depression are a gift. They are things I manage, and I'm like, they certainly give me a lens, but, like, but having said that, they are also not things that, and this is sort of the difference too between Ivy and Dahlia. Ivy, the big sister, to her, it's a question of, is Dahlia okay? And I think, I didn't have her say it in this, but, like, I imagine a year ago when these things were really coming into focus for them, Ivy probably had conversations with her parents about, how do we make her better? How do we get her better? And that's not a thing. You manage, you live with. It's not a question of, like, you can have better days or worse days, but, like, there's not a pill to make it go away. There's, so anyway, there are ones to help, and I'm grateful for those. But I think that for Dahlia, part of the reason that she is more open to the magic is something she says to Ivy at one point. It's like, I saw what I saw. We know I don't see things, so I had two choices. I can either decide that it's real, or I can decide that I was hallucinating. I cannot believe the evidence of my eyes, and only one of those things is acceptable, and therefore they were real, I believe it. And if the only explanation for that is that magic exists in some form, then magic exists in some form. But, like, Ivy, who is very, and some of it is the detective obsession and the mysteries, like the clues. She's thinking of the moment, I think, that happens in a lot of mysteries where it's like, this would seem to be impossible if not for, someone flying up to the, third floor to get into that, through that, to solve the locked door problem. So Ivy is looking for the moment where all of a sudden you find the clue that makes the impossible possible, but, like, for real. Like, this is the thing that looked like magic, but really it was just, there were two doors, or, whatever. But Dahlia's like, no, because none of that explains, a cat with wings, and I saw it. So you're going to have to get on board, or you're going to have to pretend. Like, believe if you can. And Remy says this, believe if you can, pretend if you have to. And for a long time, she really does have to pretend. And then there's a moment where all of a sudden she can't anymore, and it's very obviously real, and she kind of has a breakdown. But I think Dahlia spends so much time figuring out, like, how to deal with everything around her, that there is a part of her that's just, this one at least is easy, I saw it, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit
Okay, that's the sisters. Now Remy is another very important character, and let's talk about him a little bit. He is of a family that is, I mean, Jess is obviously, she's a world winner, and deeply embedded in the tavern and everything. And her daughter is Sally?
Her niece, her actual niece by blood, as opposed to, yeah, Remy calls her his honorary aunt, and the girls call Sally their honorary.
They're living outside of Rialto.
Yeah,
But they have deep connections to it through Jess.
yeah.
And Remy is also kind of dealing with the fur lady himself, I suppose. But he's already knows it's there, I guess. But how does he, what's my question here? How does that help, how does the trio propel a dynamic between the mystery and the emotion stakes of the story?
That was kind of a hard one to navigate because the question of how much Remy knows was an important needle to thread. There's a thing that sometimes happens in books, and again, I'm not knocking it because it can be done very well, where it's like the kids versus the adults, and anything the kids figure out, they figure out in spite of the adults. And I didn't want to have that here, although again, there are one or two characters who were like, not telling you anything. So that in itself was a needle to thread, but then also the fact of Remy knowing certain things, but not knowing everything. And it's akin to, we were talking earlier about like how folklore in this world sometimes will turn out to be true. But somewhere in one of these books, I have a line I was really proud of that was like, even in a world with magic, not everything is magical. And even in a world where these things are true, not everything is. So for Remy, who has grown up with some of these stories and has grown up with some of these characters, but is not from the town himself. He had grandparents who were passing through there and were very good friends with Jess. His father, his mother passed away when he was 9. His father married Jess's daughter, who they have a very healthy relationship, but not just his daughter, her niece. So then his stepmom, Sally, is also very deeply embedded in Rialto. So the difference between what Sally knows and believes, what Remy's dad knows and believes, and what Remy knows and believes, there's like 4 levels of, think of it like a family story that's been passed down from 4 generations. The person who's at the end of that is going to get some things wrong. The person who is closest to it will believe the weirdest of the family. You're like, you're not going to believe that this is really true. But by the time it gets down here, maybe it's watered down or changed in that way that stories do. So there was that sort of needle to thread. Who knows what? Who believes how much of it? And how much of it feels like a family story that was passed down, or like the good family folklore, but it sounds like a fairy tale because it probably is more like the story you were told at bedtime. And so for Remy, a lot of it is that. Like, he certainly knows and believes more than the girls, but he's 2 generations removed from anyone who like really knows what's going on there. That was also a fun one because it kind of puts him in some places in a position of like, I know things you don't. And it's not that I don't want, like I have to build up trust too. But even then, it's, I know things you don't, but I don't know how much of it I believe.
That dynamic again of the girls helping him, but then discovering what's going on as he becomes more and more.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
All right, well, those 3 characters are front and center in the story. Readers also get to meet the sister's mother, among other colorful and rich characters. A few sharp-eyed readers might have noted that she shares some wonderful characteristics with the author.
Oh,
Isn't the mother character in Rialto based on you, or did she just happen to inherit some of your own real-life energy and interest?
She inherited from me that she was writing a book about theme parks. Now I'm going to have to go back and figure out, does she have my energy? Is that like...
I thought
she has...
I thought you were putting yourself in the story.
Oh, not intentionally.
Not intentionally.
No, we both are writing books about theme parks. We both like bourbon. But she is, I share much more in terms of like mental health things with the girl's dad, and with Dahlia. Yeah, but the mom probably does talk like me. She probably does like have some mannerisms, but it was not intentional. I think that's very much like writing my grandmother at my great aunt's house into that book. I intentionally gave Milo the cookies my great aunts baked, but I wasn't thinking specifically of 3 Dutton Avenue.
So she's not you. Interesting. All right. I thought maybe you were kind of sneaking yourself in.
No, that's funny though.
One of the elements that has become a true signature of your writing is the way characters share tales, little histories, and folklores from the larger narrative. How is this internal character-driven storytelling so important to the architecture of your worlds, and how does that process apply specifically to Rialto?
You know, this is a good time to come back to something that you asked earlier about Julian Roamer that I completely forgot because I got off on a tangent. The storytelling thing started out really self-serving because, so there was a story told in Bone Shaker because Natalie's mom is like the town story keeper. There's a story told in Broken Lands because I needed to use a story from here. So there were like plot reasons I added it in there. And then I was writing Green Glass House and I wrote the Julian Roamer story and a couple other stories. And that was not really intentionally, you know, I did stories here, I'm going to do them here. It happened in this one. And it might have been in the back of my mind. But then the year that this was published, my friend Kristen, who was a bookseller where I worked at McNally Jackson way back in the day, sent me out to all of her book fair visits. And I didn't have any tech. I didn't really know how to do a school visit. So I just went in and I started with telling that story in every class I went into. And then from there, it was just like the Q&A would go on and on and on. And even if it was just questions about Julian and what happened next. So then I was like, oh, wait, if I have a story that I can pull out in every book, then I have an immediate thing for school visits, bookstore events if I'm going to do a presentation. And even if I want to take a slide deck, if God forbid the tech goes out, I can do that and not have a problem. And so that's what I did. And so then from that point on, it was like, I'm make sure every single one has it. But fortunately, like the way that this world has developed, it has become something that's like really important. Which brings me to the Julian Roamer question. I think it's in Green Glass House, or maybe it's in Raconteur. Someone says, you can't tell a story without telling the listener something about yourself, even if you don't mean to. And so I go into schools and I tell the Julian Roamer story. And this came out in 2014, so like 13, coming up on, 12, 13 years now, I would get one question almost every single time after telling that story, which is, did he ever get the other 2 wishes, and what did he do with them? And for 12 years, I told the truth, and I said, I don't know. I didn't think about that. I didn't write that part of the story. Same thing with, like, is anyone related to Julian Roamer? I don't know. Maybe someday I'll figure that out and make a decision. But for right now, at the time, I was like, I don't know what he did. And what do you think he did? And I don't think that every story needs to be finished to be meaningful, but so I kind of like wrote that up. And I was like, that's interesting. Like, what do you think he did? What would you do? Like all the ways that you do like open-ended questions at school visits. And then I was writing this book and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I do know what he did with those wishes. And so the second part of that story is in this. So now when I go into schools, I say, like, I tell that first part and then I tell the second part. But then that part still ends on a cliffhanger. So when you get to the end of this book, when I start going into schools with classes that have read this, I suspect there will be a new question at the end that I now will have to decide if I want to start thinking about. But Julian's travels do very much underpin the theme work. Oh, no, direct.
But it's fine. I mean, I think you have this kind of connection, and if I'm ruining the story, I will cut it out of this interview. But
No.
You have the coins and the cross.
Oh, yeah.
And you have people who come into Rialto to do this crossing, which was apparently what the point of the town was before the theme park was ever known.
Yes.
And this is where you go back to Julian Roamer and the Roamers.
Yes.
And you've got this whole like sub-universe in here, and the crossings and traveling and different worlds. And Where does this all fit in?
Well, we began to, so I'm going to tread very carefully here.
Yeah.
So we began to get a sense of these crossings in Raconteur's Commonplace book. There's one of the stories is called, what's the title of that one? The Ferryman. So there's a ferry crossing in Nagsby, and a ferryman. There's this idea that there are some crossings that you can only make at certain places. And this, I feel like, goes back to something that's true, but in a poetical sense, that you never cross the same river twice. And any place you cross a river, you're really crossing a different river, just by virtue of removing water. But I like the idea that that could be literally true, and that maybe if you cross the same river at the same place, by swimming, walking, whatever, versus being taken there by a ferry. In this world, it's a ferryman, but that can mean any different thing. Someone who can conduct you, almost like a psychopomp or a river Styx, Charis kind of situation. You might wind up somewhere other than just the opposite bank that you saw before you started crossing. And some of this is like, oh gosh, how do I get there with that? But anyway, I do like the idea that there are other worlds.
I mean, it's almost philosophy that's coming out in your book here. Yeah. And I don't want to spoil anything, but it's one of the magical moments of how the book ends. And it's a very cinematic, beautiful ending, by the way, which is like,
Thank you.
Which is like, well, I think this would incredibly make a great movie or TV series because it's so rich in all of this folklore and all of these colorful characters and these colorful animals that worked on. We'll not go any further on that.
I so badly want to dive into it, but I'm afraid we'll get close to spoilers. But in Raconteur's Commonplace book, if you read The Ferryman, which is this short story, it's Nagspeak on one side and a place called Fiddler's Green on the other. It is not the only place you can get to Fiddler's Green. And by extension, I assume, it is not the only crossing that would take you to another unexpected place. So I think there are other opportunities. But yes, Rialto was built for a specific purpose. And
Read the book, you'll find out.
if you read the book, you'll find out, yes. All these cryptic
You gotta leave it at that. Okay, so the internal storytelling beautifully feeds into the sheer scale of the community that we meet. Rialto features a beautifully large cast of characters, and instead of feeling crowded, it gives an entire story this rich, tapestry-like depth, almost an epic feel. How do you manage such a diverse roster of characters without losing the reader? And how does having so many distinct voices help elevate the world of your story?
I love that you said that because not everybody agrees with you on that. But that's always the truth. Like, I like big casts, and so I'm always going to run afoul of every once in a while. There will be, someone who's like, oh my God, it's so many characters to keep track of. And if that's you watching this video, you're not wrong. I really like big casts, in part because, I don't know, like if you're going to build a town, which this part of this was an exercise in building a place that I hope I get to write more things in. So much like Nagspeak, like I know all these different parts of Nagspeak, and it's big enough now that I don't have to, I can pick different parts of it. But even with Bone Shaker, like I think there are people who give a place its character, and some of them will be the kids that inhabit it and seek out its secrets and the wonders of it. And part of it are the people who shaped it, and part of it are the people who founded it. And like all of those different, same way that a story changes as you pass it between generations, the different ways that a place gains its layers and gains its complexity from all of these different people, some of which will be adults, which is the other thing. Like, I write kids' books with a lot of adults in them, and that's also a fine line, but and in Bone Shaker and Broken Lands and some of the other books, there's kind of this implication of there are certain pillars of the city that really give it its shape, and they change, but like if you know who those people are, they're like tend to be tied into the folklore of things. So I think that to make a place feel real, it does have to feel like a place where real people live. And so then the challenge becomes like, having enough of that while not getting so big that you need like a dramatis personae at the beginning, which maybe I should have, honestly. It's entirely possible. But also making sure that each of the different people has something to give that pushes the plot forward. And has something other, and it can't just be that they are there to obstruct or aid. It needs to be there is a reason they're in this town. They have a history in this town. There is a material reason why they are a person that the kids need to interact with that is not purely plot, but has to serve the plot. Because I think in a book with a big cast, you can find the puzzle pieces that are plot. They're there to. You can find it. Like, they will be the weak links, and that's not to say I've never written those. I try to not, but you can spot them when they do, and they tend to be the ones whose names you don't remember, or you roll your eyes when they come back on. So I'm really glad to hear you say that, though. There was a version with a much larger cast. There is always a version with a larger cast in any book that I write. 3 people have been taken out minimum.
Okay. I think you handled it very well. I mean, it is, as a reader, it is hard sometimes to keep track of who's who. Like, who's Thea, who's Tobias, who's, anyway, they come together, and as the story goes on, who's Ramona, you can lose track of that, but each one has a uniqueness about them that makes them add an East flavor. It's getting I don't think else. But also, okay, so we'll leave that at that. Again, avoiding spoilers. But when we interviewed you before for Rank and Choice Commentaries book, you didn't give us the background about that being optioned. And can you give us an update on where you are at this that way?
The only update I can give you, my buddies at the production company check in with me periodically. Last summer I got to sit down and have coffee with my closest contact there. They did renew the option, so they are now in their second option period. So I don't imagine I will hear anything for a couple months, but the good news is they renewed it, and every once in a while my friend there will email and say, hey, just want to let you know, like, still going. And every once in a while he says, because we went with them because they wanted to build a cinematic universe, which is very much what I would like. And so every once in a while he's like, I gotta tell you, I tried to simplify, just because people, like, when you pitch these things, sometimes simple's better, but it just doesn't work. Like, it needs to sprawl. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Thank God. So, yes, I still feel optimistic, but yeah, that's all I can say.
All right, well, that wraps up the questions. Now we got the reading and the pitch.
Okay.
And do you have a section of the book that you could read to us? And the writing in this book also is very rich, and there are some sections that are really beautifully written.
Let's see.
If you can maybe find one first, that would be great.
Okay. I almost want to just tell you what happens next to Julian. What if I very quickly tell you? What if I give you the school visit pitch? So, do you want me to give you like the pitch for the book, and then, or just okay? All right. So, well, you've kind of gotten a sense maybe of like the plot at this point. And we have some magical things and some amusement park things. And we've talked a little bit about, like, one of the most important stories in this is the story of Julian Roamer. And you won't enter the story knowing this is important. But again, this is the thing where it was like, oh, told this story a million times and then figured it out here. So for people who've not read Green Glass House, you don't have to if this part of the story is also here. The story of Julian Roamer is the story of this young man who made a wish, didn't know there was a shooting star in the sky, and all he wanted was to repair the road that he takes every day from work to home and home to work and back again, because it was a really hard road to walk on. So he met first a shooting star, and then a woman from a wishing well, and then a wishing stick. And each time he tried to wish for a better road, but he got a little too specific, so each time the wishing creatures would say, don't make that wish, make a different wish. And so in the process, he got himself a pair of magic shoes, he got himself a road with, like, where the paving stones were gone, but then it turned all muddy and like didn't work. And then, but each time the first two said, I don't think you should make the wish you're trying to make right now. So I'm going to tell you what wish I think you should make, and I'm going to give you a wish for the future. And then he met the third creature, the wishing stick, and the wishing stick was like, you just want a road that works? I will do that, but I can do better than that. Give me your shoes and your knife and your lantern. And he cut a symbol onto each one so that when Julian put his shoes back on, roads paved themselves under his feet wherever he went. And he could just take off the shoes if he didn't want to do that. And he also had like a knife that would always cut a path and a lantern that would always light his way. And the wishing stick said, so choose your roads wisely, because the roads you paved with your shoes will last. And then he says, roam well, Julian, until we meet again. And he leaves. And that's where the story ends in Green Glass House, with Julian having these magic shoes that pave roads, and two wishes metaphorically in the bag. And that's when I would get asked by kids, what did he do with his other two wishes? And what I tell kids at the end of that story is I say, in the roads that he paved, they did last, and they're roads that can lead you to magical places and adventures and great stories, and you can still find them if you look, and I hope that you will. And then I get that question about two wishes, and I'd be like, I don't know, man, I don't know. Ask me something I don't. And then I was writing Rialto, and as I said, I figured it out. I do know what happened, and the second part of the story is in this book. And what happened then is Julian kept meeting these wishing creatures over and over and over, wherever he went. It was like he suddenly had a magnet and would just keep finding them. And in every place he went, the same thing would happen. He would try to make a wish, and the wishing creature would kind of go, I don't think you should do that, but I'm going to make a suggestion. If you take my suggestion and make this other wish, I will give you a wish for the future. And that wish in this book is represented by these coins with fizz in them. And so Julian kept meeting these creatures. He met a group of cats playing a game with chestnuts that cautioned him against making a wish in anger. He met young woman with a laundry basket on her back, followed by a fox. And that woman cautioned him against making any wish meant to change who he fundamentally was inside. And then he met a woman sharpening a pair of shears who warned him against making a wish to bring someone back to life. And over and over and over, he would get these extra wishes, these little coins with holes in them. And so he started keeping them in a bag. And over time, the bag filled up. And then one day, he came to a finger post, crossroads with signs going everywhere. And there was a little girl staring up at it, and she was very upset. And Julian walked up to her and said, "Are you okay?" And the girl looked up at the sign and said, "I wish I didn't have to make this choice that I'm about to make." And Julian opened the bag, and he took out a coin, and he said, "Well, I have to say that wishing away my ability to make a choice is not something I would do. But take this and use your best judgment." And from that point on, it was like the magnet had flipped, and Julian, collector of wishes, became a wishing creature himself. And everywhere he met people who needed just a little something. Sometimes it was a big thing, sometimes it was a small thing, but it was always something that they just couldn't quite do on their own. And he tried, remembering how it had felt to be sort of told, no, don't make the wish you want. Even if, in his case, sometimes they were right. He tried to listen and figure out what it was the person really needed. And sometimes he would give advice, but every single time he would just hand out the coin and say, take this, use your best judgment. And little by little, he gave them all away. And then one day, after he'd given away, after years of wandering, the last coin in his bag, he came to that same finger post. And as he looked, he saw that all of the signs pointed to places he'd already been, because Julian had really roamed well and wandered and explored places and met people and heard stories. And as he was realizing that, a new sign came up, like a mushroom out of nowhere, and it said Fiddler's Green. Fiddler's Green was a place Julian had heard of, but he had never been. And so he thought, all right, that's the road I'm going to take. So he followed that road until it came to a ferry dock crossing a river. And there was a ferryman, and the ferryman said, I'm happy to take you across, but there's only one place you can cross from here. And I have to tell you, I take people across to Fiddler's Green, but I very rarely bring people back. And Julian said, that's all right, I've never been, that's where I want to go. And the ferryman said, okay, great, do you have a token for crossing? And Julian showed in his empty bag, and the ferryman said, well, it's okay, I can give you one, but I'm not allowed to give it to you for free. So, do you know any riddles? And Julian said, I don't know any riddles, but I'll tell you a story. And he told the story of how he had first acquired his magic shoes. And the ferryman listened and he smiled, because Julian had been roaming for so long that by now the roaming world had started to pass around his story. And so when Julian was done, the ferryman said, I've heard that one, tell me another. And Julian said, well, I will if you tell me one. And so they traded stories all night long. And at the end, the ferryman gave Julian a token carved from bone with the hole in the center, and he took him across to Fiddler's Green. And on the other side, Julian tried to hand the token back, and the ferryman said, "No, you keep it. Maybe you'll find someone else who needs it." And so Julian put that first token into his bag, which was no longer empty, and he walked off into Fiddler's Green. And no one who knows, no one who hasn't been to Fiddler's Green knows whether or not Julian went on to become a collector of crossings or a giver of them. But maybe someday, if you go to Fiddler's Green and you come back, you can tell me. And that's how the story ends in Rialto. Faint spoilers, but not really.
And now, can we get a pitch on why we should all read Rialto?
I think you should read Rialto because I think it's really special to me because it's a story about sisters, and I'm a big sister, and it's a story about stories and about the things that we love, the books the kids love. There's a lot of books that they read in it, the music that goes through it. There's arts and crafts that are wonderful. There's lace making and baking and all the things that, like, all the little things that feel magical, but really we can all do them. And there's just a little magic in all of those things. And it's a story about this theme park. And I think if you like theme parks, I think you're not going to get into this theme park for a while in this book. But I think when you do, you'll really enjoy it. And I think if you love fabulous creatures, you'll love it. And I think if you like puzzles, you'll love it. And I think if you want like a really nice read for the summer, where you can sit with the beverage of your choice, whether it's lemonade, you should have maybe some fruit slices or some of your favorite, like, you know, vacation foods, and sit out on a porch and look for strange lights in the woods as the lights get dark.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, John, for having me. Thank you for welcoming me to Kinokuniya again.
Thank you. And Rialto is available for purchase right now in store at Kinokuniya or online by clicking the link in the description box below. Signed copies are also available, but only while the supplies last. Thank you all for watching, and thank you, Kate, for joining us again.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.